The idea of the noble wandering samurai is something that has taken root in popular media for a long time. It can be seen in many forms, from the Akira Kurosawa samurai films, anime such as Samurai Champloo and Samurai X, to the influences on other genres, such as Clint Eastwood's Man with No Name trilogy, which was influenced by Kurosawa's Yojimbo films. Our perception of the noble samurai have been shaped by comics, novels, television, and movies that have taken these warriors and glorified their myths for decades. Because of these portrayals, it is no wonder that our idea of who and what the samurai were has molded to fit one specific picture: an ancient warrior class, defenders of the weak, a mastery of swordsmanship that can't be beaten, warriors who stood for honor, duty, and loyalty. While this image is not necessarily untrue, this idea of the samurai is something that only fits into a short period of their history. The samurai that existed were slightly different than the ones that have appeared in our favorite forms of entertainment, so we here at Tales of Earth have done a little bit of research and are going to discuss just a few of the myths versus facts about these swordsmen. The first common misconception was that samurai were a small warrior group. In reality, they were a social class all their own. The original term of samurai actually was used for those who served closely to the noble class, usually as bodyguards. During the height of their time, the samurai made up 10% of the Japanese population. Actual samurai first came into existence during the Heian period, between 794 to 1185 AD. The original samurai were simply bodyguards and soldiers to the local nobility. There was no code of honor, and they were little more than thugs with a sword, doing what they could for money. If the local lord wanted them to put down some farmers who were causing trouble and the coin was good, the samurai had no issues with obeying his orders. Samurai were used as bodyguards and soldiers to fight conflicts between lords in the land, acting as personal armies during these conflicts. This is another common misconception about the samurai. In most media, the samurai wanders into a town with nothing but the robes on his back and his swords by his side. But when going into conflict, the samurai always wore his armor, designed for protection as well as freedom of movement. The samurai's armor was as functional as it was ornate. Designed using leather or light metal plates, the armor wasn't entirely unlike the modular vest that the army uses today. Additionally, the samurai was not originally considered a swordsman. During actual conflicts prior to the mid-15th century, the samurai were actually more mounted archers than anything else. They were masters of the bow and arrow, relying on the sword only when necessary. However, as time went on, the idea of regular foot soldiers were introduced into the Japanese culture again. That is when the idea of the samurai as a master swordsman took root. If you weren't the personal army of your master, you had to show that you were needed in some way, so the samurai focused on building their skills as swordsmen and martial artists. Schools of swordsmanship sprang out throughout Japan. This is also where the idea of the swordsman traveling to challenge others came from. This is another common misconception, that the samurai were only swordsmen. While it would later be written in that the soul of the samurai resided within his katana, the samurai were in fact masters of many different weapons and fighting styles, with heavy devotion to the spear and bow. The samurai were also not strictly a male society. Onabugeisha was the term for a female samurai. These warrior women trained just as hard as the men, generally known to wield a naginata, which was a spear with a curved blade on the end. The idea of the samurai code of Bushido, also known as the Way of the Warrior as it is usually depicted in media, was introduced during the Edo period, between the early 16th century to the mid-18th century. This code is what introduced the idea of the gentleman samurai, the wandering warrior that upheld duty and honor. In fact, the code was very up for interpretation, with many parts of it conflicting with others. The samurai was loyal to his lord, and it was his duty to follow his orders. If the samurai's master told him to kill and steal, by the code, the samurai was doing nothing wrong to carry out these orders. The concept of the ronin also springs from this. If your master dies, Bushido instructed the samurai to commit seppuku, in order to follow him to the grave. If you don't, you are now masterless, and thus a ronin. In most portrayals, the ronin isn't a bad guy, just a dishonored samurai who is still trying to live by the way of the warrior and protect the weak. Most ronin generally became criminals though. They were shamed and thus could not have employment under a new lord. So really, what was stopping them from becoming just another thug? Seppuku, the act of ritualistic suicide, is another misunderstood aspect of the samurai culture. While it is included in Bushido, it had existed long before. The idea is that if a samurai brings dishonor on himself or his family, he can commit seppuku and regain his lost honor. While this was true, it was also used for different purposes, mainly for peace agreements during war. Samurai were also known to commit the act rather than being captured during conflicts, with the idea that should they be captured and tortured, all their possessions would be seized rather than go to their family. Perform a little seppuku and your family kept everything. For those that enjoyed the movie The Last Samurai, it should be interesting to note that there were 4 non-Japanese individuals in history that were given the title of samurai. These were adventurers William Adams and Jan Houston von Lodenstein, who heavily influenced the Japanese naval fleet and shipping routes. After becoming advisors to the shogun, they were eventually given the title of samurai. French naval officer Eugene Collache fought for the shogun during the Boshin War and was awarded the title of samurai. And lastly, arms dealer Edward Schnell was also gifted with the title after he became a military advisor.